Good evening. I'm Kevin Murriel, and I serve as the senior pastor at Cascade United Methodist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And to our Cascade family and the many friends who follow and support our ministry, and to the people in Georgia and across the country concerned about the focused attack on our voters' rights, I appeal to you not only as a leader in the Atlanta community, but as a pastor who understands the responsibility that I have to use the prophetic office and platform to address issues that directly affect the lives of those in our church, in our community, and those that we are called to serve across the globe. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to challenge our nation and our world, we also find ourselves once again facing the challenge of voter suppression right here in Georgia and in states across the country. The current election bills proposed by Republicans in the Georgia state legislature are clear attempts to suppress the votes of black and brown people here in Georgia. If passed, these bills would place greater restrictions on absentee voting, would criminalize offering refreshments to people standing in line to vote. They would reduce the opportunities for early voting and limit the number of absentee ballot drop boxes available. Would add an ID requirement for absentee ballot requests and would dismantle what has become a staple in the black religious community for voter turnout on Sunday mornings. We call it souls to the polls. To be sure, the legislation in question does more harm to communities of color and takes our state backwards to a Jim Crow-like era. Now, one would ask, how did we get here? I mean, the jubilation of both November and January elections that ran smoothly and expanded the means by which all people could exercise their constitutional right to cast their vote. How did we get here? During our last election cycle, we saw a more equitable means of voting. It was used by people of all ethnicities and political parties, not just people of color. And we know that in any election, there's always a prevailing party and another party that experiences defeat. This time, however, the leader of the defeated party, former President Donald Trump, launched a nationwide smear campaign of our election process that included making false claims of election fraud and even going so far as to pressure our Georgia Secretary of State to fine him a non-existent vote difference because of this loss. And these dangerous claims of voter fraud would culminate in a deadly insurrection at our nation's capital and now have trickled down to many state legislatures who are further attempting to subvert our democracy by presenting legislation that will restrict access of people of color to the ballot box. My friends, not only is this a morally reprehensible way to bounce back after an election loss, but it is inconsistent with the values that the Republican Party in particular claims to uphold. Therefore, I stand opposed to the legislation and urge each of you to stand in opposition to it as well. What happened in November and January were people from all walks of life proclaiming through our vote that we are tired of divisive politics and rhetoric that creates an ethos of intolerance and perpetuates the systemic evils that we have fought to overcome for decades. And in a time where anti-Semitism, violence against black people, and our Asian American brothers and sisters is on the rise, we must remain steadfast in our commitment to see a moral and systemic transformation here in America. And in Georgia, we didn't see the manifestation of a rigged election. Rather, we saw the fruit of record voter registration and turnout that gave people hope for a brighter and more equitable future. Grassroots organizations, faith communities, universities, and many others came together to declare that if you suppress our vote, we'll rise up and will work in harmony to show up to the polls in record numbers and to exercise our God-given right to participate in our democracy. And through this effort, history was made. The election of President Joe Biden, the election of Kamala Harris, the first black woman vice president, the election of Reverend Raphael Warnock, the first black senator from Georgia, and the election of John Ossoff, the first Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. My friends, this is what happens when the voting process is equitable. More people vote, and things begin to change. And because more people have access to vote, what we now have seen is a record coronavirus relief package that was signed into law, and we can now see some light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic that has taken over 500,000 American lives. The ability to vote unrestricted makes things better for all of us. And so in closing, we understand that there will always be those among us who, when they lose, they try to change the rules of the game in order to come out on top the next time. So to those in our Georgia legislature who are currently attempting to argue election reform under the disguise of voter suppression, please know that we see you. But more than that, God sees you. And as a pastor, my faith tells me that God is always on the side of the oppressed and suppressed. And should this legislation pass, I believe the same God that united us to rise against the injustice of voter suppression before will give us the courage and fortitude to show up in even greater numbers the next time. Because, friends, we always have a history of overcoming. And so we know they are counting on us to lose hope if this legislation passes. Hope in the potential for a fair and impartial election process. But I want to encourage you not to lose hope. This isn't the first time our vote has been suppressed, and it isn't the first attempt to silence our voices. And just like we've overcome in times past, God will give us the strength and the guidance to overcome this. We will continue to organize and register and strategize and mobilize and show back up to make our voices heard through our vote. And of course, we are urging our state representatives and senators to do the right thing. I'm urging you to stand up for our democratic right to vote in an equitable system for people across the state. And in the words of the Apostle Paul, who said, having done all to stand, stand therefore. I encourage you, my friends, to keep standing for truth and righteousness, to stand for equality, equity, and justice, to stand for a fair and equitable process. Stand therefore. But whatever comes, remember, we are a people that continue to overcome. Together, we will overturn systems that oppress, and we shall overcome. And so may justice prevail. May God watch over you, bless you, and keep you. And as God continues to guide us, may we continue to overcome together.